for Devin to tie in some of the sources that NC Live also do for our genealogists and local historian researchers. Devin, I'm going to go ahead and get started today on the slides unless you had them pulled up already. Okay, let me go ahead and do that. Just a moment, everyone, while I get those prepared. All right. So, I am sitting for my lovely colleague, Beth. She's not able to be here today, but she is our reference services, one of our reference services staff and a data librarian. So if you are ever interested specifically in North Carolina data statistics, Beth is your person. She knows an extensive amount of information about how our census records are collected over time and how you can access census information. But we're just going to do a basic overview today of some genealogy research that you can do with SLNC. So for a little bit of an agenda, I'm going to talk first about who we are at the State Library. If you're not familiar with the Government Heritage Library, hopefully after today's presentation, you will be. I'm going to get us started today. I'm going to briefly cover our North Carolina digital collections, which are an incredible resource that we co-host and co-provide access to with the State Archives of North Carolina. Also going to briefly touch upon SLNC databases. These are all of some of the wonderful online databases that we provide free access to for the researcher community. And then other SLNC services that can get you started on your research. So first, who we are. The State Library and the State Archives are often confused with one another. I talked about making sure we started off today with the who we are section on the differences. So we are both the State Library and the State Archives under the umbrella of the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. Also under our umbrella is historic sites, state parks, the North Carolina Zoo, the museum. So we are kind of tasked as a state agency with protecting and preserving both cultural and natural resources in the state of North Carolina. Under the umbrella of DNCR is the State Library, so that is my team and my unit. We are the official repository for all state government publications, and we also have over 400,000 items in our print circulating collection, as opposed to the State Archives, who primarily focuses on collecting manuscript and personal, family, and organizational records that the history Carolina and its residents. Can y'all still hear me? Okay. So a little bit of overview about the different departments of the State Library. We have the Government Heritage Library, which is where Beth and I work. Accessible Books and Library Services, which I cannot emphasize enough, is a great library to utilize and to talk to your patrons about. Accessible Books and Library Services is an actual physical library location managed by the State Library of North Carolina that provides access to print materials in Braille text for the visually impaired. So if there are ever any needs for that, patrons can submit an application to be a patron or a member of our Accessible Books and Library Services team, and they can receive access to a whole host of Braille print collection text and other machine and equipment that they can utilize for reading with visual impairment. There's our library development team, which we call the public librarians for public librarians. They are here to support all public librarians in everything they do. So if there's ever interest, you can reach out to that library development team. And then lastly, we have SLNC administration. So this is the team that manages all of us collectively as our administrative support team. So getting started, Genealogy, I always tell people it is a very, very tough or endeavor to begin on. But when you're getting started, I think there are some basic tips and tricks that we can provide you as people who receive questions about getting started with genealogical research fairly frequently. There's four main questions you can start with. Just basically, when you're researching, who are you researching? What time period? Where are they located? I would say geographic location, I can't emphasize enough, is very important because people are often registered for the counties that they live in, and that can give you a whole host of information and records to search through. And then what are you looking for? So are you looking for when somebody was married to someone else, when they had a child, when they perhaps relocated across county lines? These are all questions that are very basic, but can get you started on what at first glance with genealogy seems to be a very difficult task, which is piecing through our family histories. So for best results, we always recommend that you work backwards, especially when building a family tree or a family lineage. Start with one line of your family, and then start with the furthest back that you can go, and then work your way up to more current ancestral lines. The reason we do that is or recommend that you do that is so that you can build the tree from the top, and all of the branches that come off of your family tree will be able to build that up. It's also important to consider laws, customs, and events. I can give you one example. County lines changed over time. We have a map in the GHL reading room here that just provides you with more information about when counties changed county lines at what points. The state of Tennessee was also at one point a part of North Carolina, what we consider North Carolina today. So these are some things, being a little bit more knowledgeable about the history of the state that you're researching in, and some of the laws and customs of the time period you're searching in is a great tip. Also, like I mentioned, very important, be aware of your county boundary changes. You'd be surprised how often counties just in the state of North Carolina were formed, reformed, reshaped, established, etc. It changes quite a bit throughout time. So, like I mentioned, seeing county boundaries, you can see this image here is from the Atlas of Historical County Boundaries, which was printed and redistributed in 2010. But this is an example of the changes that happened in Burke County from 1779 to 1782, for example. So county lines drastically changed. I would say specifically in this late 1700s, early 1800s is when we see pretty significant change in the state and county's boundaries. And again, we do have a reference sheet that I can also provide everyone with access to that outlines all of the changes that occurred to state and county boundaries over time. All right, the U.S. Census. So if you're not familiar with the U.S. Census, this is another great resource for research, and we provide access in our online resources and through microfilm in person at the GHL reading room, access to census records, not just for the state of North Carolina, but across the country. The reason for us having a more broader collection of census records is that we know people are frequently migrating in and out of the state, moving across county and state lines. So for that purpose, it's really important to provide access to the entire country's census records. We have access to those resources, we will provide them. So the important thing to note about U.S. Census records is that the information that the Federal Bureau, the Census Bureau collected over time changes. So it's important to pay attention to, in the time period you're researching and the person you're trying to find more information about, what sort of information did the Federal Census Bureau collect, and how might that differ from a decade later or a couple decades later when they were asking different questions while collecting the census. So there are also a plethora of resources online that break down for each census gathering period what questions were being asked and some of the issues that may arise because of questions that were or were not asked over time. So here is just an overview of some of our online resources for genealogists and researchers who come in to visit us. We do have a large number of online resources, some of which Devin will cover as they are accessed through NC Live. And these include databases covering history, genealogy, statistics, geography, newspaper, periodicals, and more. We do have on our website a specific tab that will direct you towards online resources exclusively for genealogy. And that is further broken down into genealogy research for the state and genealogy research for other regions in the country, including the Southeast at large. Another great resource, which I believe I'll touch on a little bit more in a second, is our research guides and tools. So like most good libraries, we have a large amount of research guides and LibGuides to get you started on your research. Again, with our research guides and tools, we do have a separate section that covers the genealogical based research guides that we have access to. And then, as I mentioned previously, we are the official repository for state government publications. There's not so much use or application for genealogists in this route, but those are also an excellent resource if you're interested in legislative history. Newspaper articles. This is another thing I tell people when they are researching genealogy and local history topics. Newspapers are your friend. So newspapers often will tell you a lot of information about small local events, marriages, births, people returning from war, etc. So I highly, highly recommend that people also check out our newspaper databases. And they're a great tool for us as reference librarians to provide access to as well. And then one more thing I wanted to touch on, but I will talk on a little bit more later, is North Carolina digital collections. And these are, this is a website that we maintain with the state library and the state archives of North Carolina. And there are a number of photographs and family records that folks can provide access to. There we go. So we mentioned the North Carolina digital collection. A couple of things that we have on it. Cohabitation records, better attention applications, family records, records of enslaved people in private collections, Secretary of State wills, tax list returns. These are just a small number of different collections. Another thing that's not mentioned here is within the family records, you will be able to find some cemetery surveys and real records, which are very useful for people trying to locate family, perhaps unmarked graves, for example. So I highly recommend checking out the Carolina Digital Collections website. And these could be a good way of accessing genealogical resources from the convenience of your own personal computer or device. So here's an example of some of the records that you can find on our website. These are the cohabitation records that I was mentioning. And they are sometimes not scanned the best. That is one thing I will say. We ourselves are working to make sure that all the materials that we are scanning are scanned well, and that they are also text searchable, meaning anyone who's trying to access these documents can search in time periods and they will be able to. Hopefully that will be put in place soon. But the one thing I always tell genealogists when they're getting started is you have to know your cursive. Okay, so I know, younger K-12 students going through public schools now are not being taught how to read cursive, but if you have any experience reading and translating specifically like 17th, 18th, 19th century records, including the one on the screen, you're going to have to know how to use cursive or read cursive. So that's just one tip to prepare you all for your history research process. Another thing that I mentioned is that we do have family records and the cemetery records. The cemetery records are probably one of our most highly accessed records for researching family histories. And there are quite a few researchers we work with regularly who are in the process of trying to find and identify ancestors who are in marked or unmarked graves across the state. So some of these records can be really great. I know that the North Carolina State Archaeology Office is also very invested in making survey lists and inventories of all of these cemeteries across the state of North Carolina. So they would also be a really great resource in addition to accessing these surveys and these registers, which can be found in our digital collections website. I mentioned briefly some of our databases. A couple to take note of here is Ancestry Library Edition. The one caveat with our Ancestry Library account is that you have to be on site in the GHL reading room to access it. So I understand that that is a barrier. The icon on our website there that you'll see next to Ancestry Library Edition that has the library building icon there, that means you have to be on site. And we do have Fold 3, access to Fold 3, which is a great resource for those military records, specifically looking into personal documents of the men and women who served in their family in the military over time. And so Fold 3 is another really highly accessed database for us as well. And then lastly, JSTOR, which I think a lot of us are familiar with, provides access to over 12 million academic journal articles, books, and primary resources across many disciplines. So if there's an interest in more basic local history or state history research, we usually direct people towards. So here's an example of a record that you would access if you were accessing the Fold 3 database. Again, these can provide you with a whole host of military records, including draft cards, were very common in the early 1900s for the World Wars, and then later on for Vietnam. So if there's ever a genealogist who says, I think my family served in this period of time, almost always direct them to Fold 3. And a lot of those records are available to access and download from the Fold 3 database at no cost to the researcher. And there will be supplementary information on a lot of these military records, including that person's home location when they first signed up to serve, family members, and the rank that they entered into the military at, for example. So these are some of the contextual information that you can get from Fold 3 military records. Here's an example of something that you can JSTOR have, again, a lot that you can access, but one thing to highlight is the North Carolina Historical Review. As you can see here, there's an article that we grabbed here from the North Carolina Historical Review, which does cover a whole host of topics related to North Carolina history, people, culture, places, and events. So search the library. Like many other libraries, we do have a wonderful blog. Search for any of the circulating print materials in the Government Heritage Library. Like I mentioned, we have over 400,000 materials in our print circulating collection at this point in time. You can also search our catalog for materials that have been digitized, so things that might pop up on the digital website. And then you can also search for state and federal publications that we hold in our repository. Reference services. So I'm going to briefly touch on reference services. We do have reference email. So if there are ever any specific questions or basic questions that we can assist with, our core reference team is incredible and very responsive. You can reach them at this email, and there is a number of our reference surveying that email and responding to questions daily. We also do have chat services and Ask the Librarian. So if you follow this Go link here below that second bullet point, we do have virtual chat services, and during our hours of operation, which is Tuesday through Friday, 9 to 5 p.m. and then Saturday, 9 to 1 p.m. At all times, we have at least 1 to 2 staff members staffing that virtual reference chat. And so that's best for quick questions and, hey, where can I find this item in your collections, type of questions or inquiries you may have. And I do want to reiterate, these are people. We also help a lot of K-12 students, and they often ask us, are you a bot? We are not bots. We are real librarians doing virtual chat. And then lastly, Book a Librarian, which essentially means you can book a 30-minute reference consultation with one of our reference staff, and they can help you get started on your genealogical research or your local history research. It can also help you perhaps navigate some roadblocks you might be having to your research, which is very, very helpful. So lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't encourage everyone here in attendance today to sign up for an SLNC Government and Heritage Library card. A lot of the databases and resources that I chatted about today with you all very briefly, if you sign up for a library card, you can access for free at no cost at home or at work or wherever you are on your research process. And on the website, it will also indicate which resources you can only access in the reading room. But everything that I have talked about today is absolutely available if you are interested in signing up for a library card. And I appreciate you all listening to us today. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Devin. I know we're very eager to also get to the Q&A portion of today's conversation. And I look forward to fielding some questions after Devin.
All right, thank you so much, Taylor, for kicking things off. I will share my slides now. Let's see here. All right. Now we're going to jump into what NC Live provides for genealogy and local history. Two major resources are Heritage Quest and the Historic North Carolina Newspaper Collection. Heritage Quest is a database that's owned by Ancestry, but one of the nice things is that all library patrons in North Carolina can access Heritage Quest remotely outside the library, unlike library subscriptions to Ancestry, which patrons have to access within the library. Heritage Quest has census records, so all the census records from 1790 up until 1950 are available and searchable in there. There's city directories, there's Find a Grave, there's the Social Security Death Index, and some other government records, including the Freedmen's Bank records for post-emancipation African-American genealogy research. The Historic North Carolina Newspaper Collection are thousands of digitized county newspapers from across North Carolina, as far back as 1760 up until 1999. What you'll notice is it's not going to be the full run of all of those newspapers. You might get a couple of years, you might get a few months, you might get several decades of the newspapers that have been digitized for a particular county, but it does vary newspaper by newspaper. One of the nice things about that resource is you can search by keyword and find articles for primary source research or family history and genealogy purposes. And I'll get into those two resources predominantly in this session. One new resource that we added at the beginning of this year is the Gale Indigenous Peoples of North America. We have two recorded webinars on this resource, one for public libraries, one for uses for academic libraries, but it does have census records for the Cherokee Native Americans east of the Mississippi River, and it does have digitized records of the Lumbee tribe in North Carolina. So if your patrons are Native American and they're looking for primary source research or family research, this is another useful tool. The Sanborn maps I'll touch on briefly, but these are detailed maps of US cities and towns starting in the late 19th century, going up through mid-century of the 20th century. Map making was not a standardized practice in the United States really until the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company came in and developed these uniform standards for map making, which makes them really reliable and easy to search across decades. They're available via ProQuest. We have them just for the state of North Carolina in our A to Z list, but you can find them for other states through the Library of Congress. We do have free resources as well. So Digital NC, they digitize military newspapers, yearbooks. They have church programs. They have postcards, photographs, even film reels and things like that. And they travel around the state to different cultural heritage institutions and libraries to digitize materials. So that is nice because you can kind of see more of a person's social life or find multimedia resources that you wouldn't otherwise find in our other genealogy databases. The Digital Library on American Slavery is a project housed at UNC Greensboro. That's a resource more for pre-emancipation African-American genealogy research. I'd recommend for the typical genealogy researcher to start with the slave schedules that are in the census through Heritage Quest for 1850 and 1860 before you might jump into a resource like this one. All right, we'll start with some tips and case studies. One thing that I think is particularly helpful that Taylor mentioned is writing what you know. So parents' names, grandparents' names, great-grandparents' names, dates of birth, places lived, and the dates in which rough kind of estimate of when they lived in particular places is particularly helpful. Occupations, names of companies that they worked for, or military units are useful in building out the picture of a person's life. I think for the service desk, it's useful for the library to have just blank family tree sheets for people to work through if they're using a public computer or they're having a consultation, just so that they're able to write things out if they don't already come in with some notes and preparation. So the major case study that I'll use for this webinar is John D. Ray. So this is, he was a professor at North Carolina A&T State University. He started their agriculture program. And he also was the founder of the African American Farm Makers Club, now known as the 4-H Club in North Carolina. He's a figure of minor renown, and a librarian reached out to me a few years ago saying that they were doing research on him and they wanted to find census records on him and his family tree. And we were able to go through and find him and his family listed in the census records, in the newspapers, and other NC Live resources. I use him as an example because even somebody with minor renown, there are roadblocks, really common ones that come up. And so to illustrate that process, another tip of mine is just cluster your research, using the strategy of working as far back as you can, but knowing that there are parts of the family tree that you might find more material than others. So the example of that is what I found with John D. Ray is a lot more about his wife's side of the family and going decade by decade through the census instead of his immediate family. And for that, I was able to kind of push through the 1870 census for his wife's side of the family, which is a common roadblock in African American genealogy. And then I was also able to find his wife's side of the family in the Freedmen's Bureau records, which are post-emancipation records that are available through the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And I'll show you what that research tool looks like as well. But as I was able to move back from 1930 census through 1920 to 1900 census, I was able to take members of that family tree and search decade by decade to find more about them. I found a lot about his father-in-law. Richard H. Harris, who was born in Granville County, that's where his wife's side of the family is from, went to Shaw University, became the principal of a school in Roxborough in Person County, and then eventually became the minister of Mount Sinai Baptist Church in Greensboro. I found that one thing that was useful was using Rev in front of his name to find his father-in-law listed in the city directories for Greensboro as a clergyman. And then I even had to abbreviate his father-in-law's name further to Rev R.H. Harris to find him in the newspaper collection, predominantly because a lot of names are just abbreviated in those newspapers more so than you'd see in other documents. And then I was able to move back with his parents and find them in the 1870 census. And in the Freedmen's Bureau records, I found his mother listed in a dispute over cotton. The Freedmen's Bureau records look like this. They're very basic. Um, they're a free tool, so they're not a library database through the NC Live collection. And I just put in first name, last name, state, and year. But having Granville County as that county helped significantly. And I was able to see in 1866, Elizabeth Harris, his mother, had a dispute over cotton with Jack Winston, who was the son of Obadiah Winston, the plantation owner in Granville County. Some of the records are transcribed in this resource, others are not. They're not as text searchable. You can't like zoom in to a digitized scan as you would in Heritage Quest or the historic newspaper collection. But I mentioned this as a resource because African American genealogy tips came up in the registration. And then in terms of the city directories, I find that these are useful with the mention of cursive and handwriting before city directories are typed up. And so you don't have as many of those errors with misspellings or character recognition, even with a name. And so it's easy to kind of cross-check what you might see in the census with the directory to kind of verify a person's name, their address, even see their occupation. And you can see a full list of businesses. So if you knew that your great-great-grandparent owned a business in North Carolina, you can look them up in the city directories and find more information from there. And so we'll jump into Heritage Quest now. The user interface of Heritage Quest has changed slightly to kind of mirror what Ancestry provides. I don't recommend searching in this full search here. I think it's much better to actually just use the search by collection underneath it. And so if I am going to search in the census, I also would recommend picking your census year. So again, we have these all the way from 1790 to 1950. And within that, one thing that I found useful when I was doing the search is middle initial is very important because it could search for any John Ray. And then I could do exact spelling if I wanted to. I could do similar if I wasn't quite sure about the spelling of the last name. But because this can be confused with RAY as the last name, I do prefer to use exact spelling with this search. Lived in, I'm going to put Greensboro. I could put in birth year as 1885 and say exact. But this is how I would start things off. And now I see his record. I have this view here to see household. I see that his mother-in-law and sister-in-law live in the house on 150 North Dudley Street. His wife is listed as Nanny Ray. Her name was Annie. This is where that handwritten record comes into play, and names were misspelled or nicknames were used. And so that's where I think it's useful year to year to be flexible to see, okay, somebody might be listed as John one year and Johnny the next, or in the next decade. And so being able to zoom in and hover over names is useful. I see his eldest son, John Jr., who was listed as Johnny in the 1910 census. And then his wife is listed as Nanny, even though her name is Annie. And then it's useful to use neighbors because people typically did not move that often. There's a lot of multi-generational households. So I would use this family here, the Seaver family, and the Snipes family below to cross-check. Even the other families listed on this particular page. I think that's useful year to year to see, all right, where's this family living? Is this the right Ray family or Harris family? And then kind of move my way back year to year. One of the things that you'll notice with that viewer is you have a couple of settings options. I think the zoom is your best friend when using this. But I would say here you can change, you can invert the colors. I don't think it's particularly helpful. You can download this image as a JPEG if I wanted to, or print it. You can also email this to yourself. So that's helpful for patrons that are using public computers. I'm going to go back to the home page and show. All right, let me go back. There we go. Nope. Okay. For some reason, it doesn't want me to leave. There we go. So if I go into the city directories, I also recommend using middle initial if you can. You can even do residence year, but I'm just going to use this search and I see his son listed, John D. Ray Jr. But let's say I want to find John D. Ray listed in 1929. I can zoom in and find him listed with his wife here. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so you can see that better. But as you can see, there are many other Rays listed in the Greensboro City Directory. So that's where that middle initial and other family members' names are useful to cross-check. I'm going to go back and show here Richard H. Harris, his father-in-law. If you know that the particular ancestor, great-great-grandparent, great-grandparent that you're looking for was a member of the clergy, I think these city directories are useful because you can see all the members of all the clergymen in Greensboro or the particular city or town that your ancestor lived in, listed all in one place. So there's the alphabetical directory of names and addresses, but then there's also the business directory in these. And that's useful because if you know that somebody that you're searching for owned a business or they had a medical practice or a law practice, you have these this directory in the back as well. And then you can take those details like business, occupation, member of the clergy, things like that, and use the newspaper collection to find more articles or coverage or advertisements about related to that person. Now, going back to the homepage of Heritage Quest, there are research aids at the top. For some reason, it's not letting me click. I'm going to try that again. There we go. But these are printable handouts, creating timelines that produce answers, a primer on African American genealogy, cemetery research primer. They're printable. Having them by the desk or sharing them with patrons, having QR codes with links to them are useful. You don't need to necessarily include your library's proxy information when you use a direct link to any of these handouts, these research aids here. All right. Any questions about Heritage Quest before we jump into the historic newspaper collection? All right. So in these newspapers, there are a couple of approaches to searching. You can search by a particular newspaper. So if you want to see all the issues of the Charlotte Observer that we have in the collection, or all the issues of the Statesville News and Record, or the Daily Tar Heel. You can see those by newspaper. You can also search by a person's name. What I recommend with that is being flexible about abbreviation, but also putting quotation marks around a full name, and middle initial, adding that in is really helpful. You can search by topic or event. So for primary source research, if you're looking for coverage of Hurricane Fran, or World War II, pulling out keywords related to a particular event is important, because it's not necessarily going to give you results it's giving you results based on the articles published at the time. You wouldn't find coverage like from D-Day listed as D-Day. You would look and use search terms like Normandy, and then pinpoint the actual dates of D-Day and around that time in July, June, July in France, and get that coverage from the North Carolina newspapers. You can search by date as well. If you just want to see the newspapers in the collection from 1760, you can narrow by date. So I'll show you what that looks like. Another thing that they've added in the advanced search is categories and collections. So then you can actually just select obituaries, marriage announcements, birth announcements in this collection, and use that filter if you want. Don't always rely on names. Those addresses that I mentioned from the city directories, business names, unique occupations, or names of military units or schools, sports teams, churches that they're affiliated with, are also useful keywords in trying to locate a person in the newspaper collection. One thing to note with the newspaper collection is, especially in the late 19th, early 20th century, it's such a full record of social life in a county. There are articles about when somebody went to the state fair or when they had relatives in town. So there's a lot of detail in them. I would also stress that Digital NC has African American newspapers and African American high school newspapers for research as well. And so I'm going to jump into this collection. If you are feeling particularly inspired after, or you have patrons that use this collection frequently, I think having an account is helpful. So that way you can save clippings of articles for later. If somebody's doing family research in this collection, I highly recommend getting an account and creating clippings to keep track of things. So whenever I'm searching for a person in this collection, I put in keyword. I can put in date range if I want, or location as well. But I'm just going to put in John D. Ray and see what comes up. Oh, let's see what's going on here. Let's try this one again. All right, there we go. Sometimes it just needs a quick refresher. So as you can see, when I put in full name, quotation marks, I can zoom and see that clipping's already been made. I might have made that clipping or somebody else did. And this is in Greensboro, but I can also find coverage potentially in other newspapers in North Carolina if I want to scroll through these results. You can see John D. Ray listed in the Robesonian. And here I can zoom in and zoom out to get a better look. I can change the brightness or contrast, which is useful. I think that's better than inverting the colors of the scan. And then if I want to clip this, I'm just going to clip example. And then you can check the box if you want the clipping to be visible to everyone or just be in your account. Totally up to you. You can add tags if you want it to be visible. And then I can edit this clip because I didn't crop it properly. So it's really easy to go back and edit a clipping if you want. And then I'm able to save it and I have it in my account, which is great. Just to show you with those abbreviations, I had the hardest time finding his father-in-law in the newspapers. Let's try this. There we go. But I had to abbreviate by title and then first name and middle initial. So you might find somebody is not showing up and then you abbreviate their first name and a middle initial, and it can show up that way. Like it might be somebody who's Dr. WB, and then their last name might pull up a search rather than listing out their full name. In terms of other ways to search, I'm going to go back to the home page. You can browse by a particular location. So if I wanted to find, let's look at Boone, the Watauga Democrat, which is available for many, many years of coverage. I can look through and click on this issue from 1902 and zoom out and see more from this newspaper. If I were to search by a particular name, I could see E.S. Coffee here, attorney in Boone. And then I can browse by the whole collection of papers. This is the alphabetical list. This is where you can change it by year. So if I just wanted to find the papers that were available pre-1784, I have 5 papers here, and I could find the New Bern Gazette. And if I click browse, I can see July 6th, 1764. And I can change that brightness to make it a little easier and that contrast a little. Let's try that. The scans are not always perfect, by no means. I could even invert the colors, but I, again, don't really think that makes it easier. But you can go through and see issue by issue. Some scans as far back as 1798, 1765 are fairly easy to read. This is a better one, as you can see, but some are just, it's a little hit or miss sometimes. In terms of that A to Z list, you can see what new papers have been added to the collection and which ones have been updated with more issues, like the Statesville Record and Landmark, the Winston-Salem Journal. And then you can also narrow by location. Our papers are just North Carolina, but there is a map feature if you wanted to browse by map. Let's see where that feature is. Go back to the archive home. Can browse by date. They might have removed that map feature. Nope. If you go to browse and then you see browse by map, it's kind of hidden. You can zoom out and see this map-based view of the newspapers. So this is nice if you want to kind of get that bird's eye look and then see what's available in your county. So you could see the newspapers that are available in Gaston County, in Lincoln County, in Cleveland County. I can look at the Mountain Eagle. This is from 1861. or I can go through and go county by county and look at the prohibitionist in Salisbury and Rowan County. And I can browse these issues from 1881 from the prohibitionist. So there's a lot of different county newspapers, great tool for genealogy, as well as teaching primary source literacy. If you click on clippings, you can see all the clippings that have been done as of the most recent. So the most recent public one is from 17 minutes ago. The clippings database is nice because then you can search for, let's say you wanted to search for all coverage of Michael Jordan in the North Carolina newspaper collection. And you can see a lot of clippings from his career at UNC, in college, from the Daily Tar Heel. Or if I wanted to search and find articles related to the state fair, I could also search in the main search, but potentially I might find some here, or by a particular event, like I could look at World War II and see what has been added with that clipping. It's just more informal because it's this public tagged database. But it can be useful for searching. Like if you wanted to find articles related to prohibition, you could potentially find something here. Or looking at, a clipping related to Theodore Roosevelt. But that's where this can be a useful tool as well. If I go to my clippings, I can share that with y'all. But this is where you can find, in your own clippings when you save them. As an example, one of our member libraries wanted to find articles related to when the library originally opened in their town in 1922. And we were able to find them in the collection. So that's where having that account is helpful to keep track of things. Now I'm going to jump back into my slides. Using abbreviations, I have some screenshots of different articles that I was able to find for this family in the newspaper collection. Using keywords, so just reminding patrons that when they're trying to search for coverage of World War II, to pull out keywords related to major events, locations, historic figures, dates are really key, so that you can find that coverage because it's there in the collection. If you're doing research on the civil rights movement in North Carolina, pulling out particular names, events, like the Woolworths, the lunch counter sit-ins, you can find coverage in the collection. One thing that was brought up to me recently is a library trying to find recipes from their county newspapers from the Great Depression, because around the Great Depression, there were a lot of newspapers that would put out like thrifty meal recipe or economical meal. If you search specifically using thrifty or economical, and recipe around that time period, you can find a bunch of really interesting results. So I highly recommend flexible keyword searching in this resource. In terms of putting it all together, this is an example of don't just use one database, but search across multiple to get a full picture or kind of even solve a mystery. So one mystery that came up for me is I was searching in the Sanborn maps for Chapel Hill, and I saw the University Inn listed as being on Franklin Street, which was interesting because I know the Inn is not on Franklin Street anymore. And then year by year, I saw in the next Sanborn map set from 1925 that the University Inn was renamed the Carolina Inn Hotel and was moved to the corner of West Cameron Avenue, where it's still in its location now. And I was curious. And so what I did was I found out in searching in the historic newspaper collection that the original inn burnt down in November of 1921. And there's this less than flattering article about the University Inn fire in the collection, where they go so far as to say there are lovely things even about the hideous pseudo dormitory that during recent years has cursed our campus with its ugliness. Even a hag may have been a belle. So um, that was able to solve my mystery by searching across these resources. And then I was able to find an image, photograph of the fire in digital NC. So that's one of the nice things when you're doing North Carolina genealogy research or local history research is you have the benefit of searching across multiple different collections, state library collections, NC Live databases, digital NC, to really build out a full picture of a event in time, like a fire or a family history. So with that, you will have the link to these slides. I'll attach Taylor's slides. And then I did want to highlight, we have a lot of marketing materials on our website that you can order from vendors to be shipped to your library free of charge, or you can print them out. And so you can order bookmarks for Heritage Quest, and ProQuest will print those and ship them to your library on glossy cardstock. We have infographics, we have flyers that you can order, posters. So if you're looking to promote those resources and you want some quick ways to do it, this is all at no cost, and you're welcome to put in those orders, and then we manage the shipping through the vendor. Just wanted to share some key resources. These are a couple of ones related to African American genealogy, specifically in North Carolina. And then my favorite book for genealogy is Helping Patrons Find Their Roots. I highly recommend your library having a copy, maybe one that you can share across branches or have at your library branch, because it's just useful for any librarian or frontline staff, anybody who's new to working in a library. It's just a great primer on getting started and helping a patron through their search. I've included some LibGuides from UNC Chapel Hill and UNC Greensboro that are useful as well. And then some digital NC collections listed. One thing that I recommend with digital NC is if you go to their website, they have a tab that says Browse by County or Browse by Exhibit. If you click Browse by Exhibit, that's where you'll find the content of the website organized into these collections like newspapers or yearbooks or particular contributing institutions. So we are going to make sure there's time for questions in the next 10 minutes. But if you'd like to share in the chat, what is one key insight or tip that you'll take away to enhance your genealogy research journey? Yeah, Leslie. Yeah, I definitely think the newspapers are a great tool for genealogy. Um, and if a patron hasn't tried using the newspaper collection, just browsing around is great. One of the nice things with the databases through the state library and through NC Live is they can access them from home. Yeah, Heather sharing, I wasn't aware of the Fold 3 database for military records. using JSTOR. Being able to access so much through Heritage Quest and the newspaper database. Yeah, definitely. I also recommend, if you haven't done this before, to try with your own family tree just to get familiar. I didn't use my family tree as an example, but I think it's really useful to start that off that way. Question from Leslie. No, so Heritage Quest is available remotely anywhere. So any North Carolina library patron can access it outside the library. Ancestry is only available inside the library. Yeah, definitely tips for running into cultural barriers, or just roadblocks. One thing that's nice is the printable handout from Heritage Quest on African American genealogy research mentions that 1870 roadblock.
Well, I have a question in the chat, regarding, access to information for, Indigenous research. So we do have access to a number of resources that help with Indigenous people's research. I will say one thing we have that I'd like to, call attention to is, we on the education team for the state library, are currently working on putting together a LibGuide or a research guide that will cover a wide range of resources, both within the state library and external to us for researching North Carolina tribal communities. And we are creating that research guide in consultation with the American Indian Heritage Commission, which is also part of the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. And ideally, we're trying to get that out in October. And do some programming with that. So I would highly recommend you keep your eyes out for that LibGuide, because yes, that will have, and we will have information on all state recognized tribal communities on